right, here we go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome along to the AMA. Hi, Bruce. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Good.
That's good. I think we'll start off with introductions for everyone just quickly. So I'm Russell Thomas, the Regional Sales Manager with Secolve. I work with critical infrastructure organisations across Australia. And with me today, I've got Bruce, who will introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. Yeah, Bruce Large. I'm the Principal OT Cybersecurity Architect and Chief Evangelist at Secolve.
Great. Thanks, mate. So just a reminder for everyone, we have Bruce's profile on our website. It's an in-depth explanation of Bruce's background. Bruce is an AESCSF specialist, obviously an OT architect, and works with critical infrastructure on the daily. So rather than run through his experience now, we thought we'd save some time and just shoot you towards that profile on our website.
Yeah,
just a reminder.
We only have 20 minutes, Russell, so.
We do, mate, we do. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Just a reminder, we'd love your questions today. So please, throughout the next 20 minutes or so, populate the question feature. We'll do our best to answer those as we run through the planned topics today. This will be recorded. We'll share this afterwards. Please share with your colleagues. Hopefully we make it valuable to you all. So to start off with, Bruce, AESCSF's played a prominent part in your OT security journey. Do you mind telling us a bit about some of the challenges you've experienced personally and that you've seen the industry experience with AESCSF adoption?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's a great question. So yeah, most people would know I was actually part of the original team at PwC that worked on the framework in 2018. It's been a while. And yeah, kind of was in there in the beginning, principally worked on the criticality assessment tool, and through the process of developing the framework, then worked on facilitated self-assessments. I think I was on 6 or 7 and led 2, 3 maybe. So it was really good kind of being there, understanding the nuance and the context, and then having that experience of actually running assessments. It is quite a large framework, 11 domains, at the time 282 practices, so generally a week, which is a long time for a asset operator to spend doing an assessment. So probably one of the big early things was just when we were thinking about how we're going to run assessments is how to capture like what were the gaps, right? So you're going to bring together IT, OT, resilience, risk, supply chain, all really critical people in the business. It's actually an awesome opportunity to go, you know what, where would we like to be? What should we be doing? And in that, capturing those gaps, right, to then inform your uplift program. So then, yeah, after PwC, went into a asset, so Stanwell Corporation. It's a government-owned corporation in Queensland that operates generation infrastructure and, built out their security program. And I was actually audited on AESCSF, which was a really good experience to understand, from how do you document and how do you show defensively what you've done and what you've done to uplift, right? I think one of the best things about AESCSF, it's actually given us a common language, right? We've been able, prior to AESCSF, number of asset operators were looking at different frameworks, from 27001 onto, say, NERC-CIP, 62443, Essential 8, a lot of different standards. And I think it's difficult for stakeholders to understand where they sit, right? Like where do they land in terms of benchmarking? So interestingly, the kind of background of the AESCSF was actually from the Finkel review. There was a recommendation to understand the preparedness of the NEM to respond to a cybersecurity incident. And over time, it's really exciting. Don't know if Stu's on the call. Unfortunately, I can't see who's dialed in, but Stu Goodman and I caught up in Melbourne earlier this year. I was down for COSAC. And we're both saying it's like really cool that AESCSF is now a standard within the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act. So kind of the big lessons learned, I think, is trying to understand what to focus on, right? When you look at AESCSF, if you're going for, say, Security Profile 2 or Security Profile 3, it can actually be quite daunting. There's a lot of things that have to happen. And it's important that you try to sequence to understand what you're doing.
Mhm.
And then finally, probably just something that is interesting is seeing industries that aren't electricity use AESCSF. So, for example, it was extended to be covering gas and things like the gas cat and those kind of things. But it's just cool seeing other industries pick up some of that terminology. Personally, I'm a huge architecture nerd. In AESCSF V2, there's an entire architecture domain that gives some really good guidance. And maybe just finally, it's a second finally. Um,
Yeah.
Anti-patterns. Anti-patterns are really good. So from memory, it's about 50. I think it was 42 in V1. But anti-patterns are actually very good because they are more black and white than practices. And I think they're an excellent tool to use when reviewing projects or reviewing tenders or reviewing um, new technologies, right? To see these are the must nots for a new system. So yeah, that's
Mhm.
probably where I see it land.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Great. So this framework, while energy is in the name, it can be used across other sectors.
100%. Yeah. So this is what I say to people: like, just grab the framework core. So if you go amo.com.au and program cybersecurity, if you highlight the entire practices column and just Control F for energy or electricity, nothing's there, right? So AESCSF is derived from the cybersecurity capability maturity model, the C2M2. And there are different C2M2s, right? So there's the electricity subsector, which was the basis of AESCSF. But there's one for dams. I think there's one for gas. There's different C2M2s for different industries.
Mhm.
I'm not sure for version 2.1. I think it might even just revert back to just C2M2. But I guess the other thing too I say to people is if you're new and maybe you're a lower criticality, the AESCSF Lite, as in LITE, is actually a great tool as well, right? I think from memory it's about 28, maybe 35 questions. And the way
Mhm.
it's structured, it can actually output an AESCSF Security Profile 1 assessment. So I'd say if you're not energy and you're trying to think like, I don't know where to start, what to do, AESCSF Lite is a fantastic option to do.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you mind elaborating on those different iterations? So light, um, version one,
Yeah,
version two. What's the differences there?
yeah, so AESCSF was 2018 and PwC. AESCSF Lite happened after I left PwC, but I think in the initial reporting that happens back to AEMO, they were like, hey, the lower criticality participants. So maybe just stepping back to in the criticality assessment tool, you get categorized into low, medium, high, right? At the time, and this was all kind of where the intentions were, low criticality would be SP1, medium criticality would be SP2, and high criticality would be SP3. Another term in AES-CSF is a MIL, a maturity indicator level. So there are some higher MIL practices, MIL 3 practices in SP1, which can catch people out, right? So the higher MILs
Mhm.
tend to be more specific and a bit more onerous. But in addition, you have a thing called it's called the dual progression, but they're called management characteristics. So at MIL 2, it has to be documented, stakeholders have to be engaged, resources have to be allocated. At MIL 3, you have things like policy, you have things like periodically assessed, you have around the competence of the people doing the activity. So those MIL 3 practices sometimes can catch out people. MIL 3 practices can catch people out at a security profile 1. So I believe AESCSF Lite came out in response to, wow, it takes a long time to do an AESCSF assessment. And smaller companies, think like renewables, wind farms, um, they don't have the luxury of a big security team, right? So they need a tool that's actually a lot quicker to help generate an SP1 result set. And I think it's really cool. And I don't think there's an AES-CSF Lite for V2, but I think that could be coming. I'm not quite sure. And maybe just a shout out, like, AEMO is doing awesome work in this space. I think you can just email AESCSF at aemo.com.au. It's, the inbox is more monitored during assessment periods. But Pierce and the team, they do actually respond, and and like full credit to AEMO for listening to the industry, right, and evolving the framework.
Mm, So as these CIRMP obligations apply to more and more organisations, with the upcoming deadline coming as well, the first time they've had to comply to the standard. For those that are new to AESCSF, where do you start?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one of those classic. It depends, right? So I think the best thing to do is to download, the offline toolkit.
Mhm,
I think, getting the right people in the room, doing things like preparing agendas, things like that. I actually do recommend people, if you go, just Google C2M2, there's actually some really good guidance from the US Department of Energy around self-evaluation, right? And it has tips on like, here's the agenda, and here's the structure, and here's kind of like the aims and objectives you should have. In fact, I think it's on there, but there's even a slide pack to help you pull together that initial conversation. I think a design goal of the original C2M2 was to be able to do, a quick high level assessment in a day. That's going to be a big day. From memory, we were trying to make a security profile mil one assessment be able to be done in a day. But I think what's important is probably first just looking at the framework. I might touch on this now, but the way I like to answer a practice, right, is first, consensus. Get the right people in the room to have the conversation. Scope the assessment appropriately. Sometimes you want to scope just IT or OT, or even break OT down to different sites, different stations, different functions. And then with people in the room, I normally just start with, hey, this practice, do we think it's complete or not complete? I.e., is it red or is it green? Often people have a good gut feeling. And often in the room, the conversation is actually the most important thing in taking those notes, right? Especially if you think this is complete, but then someone says, well, I don't think it is because of this or this or this. That's
mhm,
absolute gold. Capture that, right? Use that to then drive your uplift program. So I think what's important is quickly doing that first initial assessment to see how you land,
mhm,
and then using that to build your program. I would say though, like for the SOCI reforms, there are other frameworks other than just AESCSF. So if you are like day one and thinking, what do I do? You might want to look into things like the Essential 8 or 27001, for example. But
mhm.
what I think is really great about AESCSF is it just gives some really good contextual guidance in the framework core of how to interpret and to apply intensive practices.
Great. So day to day, how are you helping organisations with AESCSF? What sort of work, I
Um,
guess, are you doing with Secolve?
yeah, so personally, I'm actually helping a few clients with kind of project remediation, especially V1 to V2, the introduction of the architecture domain. I'm an architect. That's a great outcome. So helping companies understand, like, have they got the right documentation, especially for those security profile 2, profile 3 practices. But assisting the team just with, hey, we've done an assessment and we have these gaps. How do we pull together a program to actually uplift?
Mhm,
Working with one renewable energy company at the moment to help them with, hey, how do you work with your O&M providers? How do you work with your internal teams? How do we help you get together those documents you require to, show evidence that you're doing stuff? And then just more broadly across the team, we have people just kind of being, staff augmentation, hands and feet, helping, just how do we document this? How do we uplift this? And even I think a really great one is just that kind of, hey, what's the right level of evidence to collect to demonstrate this practice being complete? That's definitely one that I am very excited to kind of help people with because I've been very active in the AESCSF community, and I even sometimes join the education webinars. Probably another huge shout out to any asset operator. Just go check out the AMA website. There's a short version that Stu did, which I quite like. But when the actual assessments are running, the team run education workshops. great experience to actually just ask some questions, hear from other asset operators. People often ask, Bruce, why are you here? Please don't make this a difficult question. I'm sure some of those people on the call now wanting to throw difficult questions at me. But yeah, I think it's good to just use those resources, right, to understand the nuance. Yeah, because it is a complex framework, but I think once you start to understand the structure of domains, objectives, practices, and how practices work together, probably like another thing I just generally have seen is people tend to mark themselves down on the lower maturity practices because they know the higher maturity practices aren't complete. So sometimes as a facilitator, it's our job to kind of go, but it is Mill 1 and it is ad hoc, so I think you're good, right? Some people go, yeah, I just want to mark down. I was like, we can get to that with the Mill 2 and Mill 3 practices.
Yeah, great. Yeah, just a reminder to the audience, please ask any final questions. We'll attempt to answer those for you. This will be shared afterwards. We are recording this session. Happy to take questions at any time, honestly, so feel free to reach out after this session. But yeah, thank you for joining. Just a reminder, we do have an upcoming Brisbane OT security meetup coming up later this month. So check out our, we've got the time and the date running across the bottom of the screen there. Check out our LinkedIn page for updates. Bruce will be there with the rest of the Queensland crew. You looking forward to that, Bruce?
Definitely, mate. Yeah, beers and getting nerdy about AESCSF. It's a normal Thursday night for me, to be honest.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time today, Bruce, and thanks to the audience for joining. Looking forward to continuing the AESCSF conversation afterwards. Any last points, Bruce?
Yeah, I was actually just going to say, I think we actually have a question here.
Yeah.
I would hazard a guess my friend Nigel might have asked this.
Go
So
for it, mate.
Nigel, absolute legend, probably one of the only cyber people that actually has read the National Electricity Law, and most importantly can quote the subsections and remind people, no, this is serious. And I think doing awesome work there. Thank you, Nigel. Yes, function, a very important term, and I think it's a great point. I should have touched on it, that there's actually a wealth of information on the AMO website around the FAQs and the framework structure, right? So the term function, and even the CTERM2 documents will define the term function, but it's kind of like doesn't mean, hey, on this org chart, this function of IT, it tends to mean things like how you've scoped your assessment. Now, some participants could be generation and retail. Some participants could be transmission and distribution. So it depends how you've cut the function up, right? And I think it's really important that if people are going to start kind of making interpretations of how they're doing function, come back to the material. And I would even say, like, even document it, even put it on a PowerPoint deck, whatever it is, even print it out and just remind people in the assessment to consistently use that term function, right? Don't use the term function as a get out of jail free card for saying, hey, we're all good. The other thing too, maybe just another little bonus tip. I talk to people, talk to senior people. I think one of the most important things in AESCSF is it's actually okay for your maturity to go backwards. It tends to mean you're probably asking harder questions, right? But you shouldn't spring this on your senior stakeholders the day before they sign the attestation letter. That's a great way to upset everyone. But I think you can have that conversation of, you know what, when we first did our assessment and we were new to the framework, we made some assumptions. We highlighted our gaps. We went and did some, investigation. That investigation actually turned out there were more gaps. That's a positive, right? That means you're better managing risk. And I think we need to have that conversation. I think, it's up to people like us as consultants, or people in industry, to kind of just share with people, like, the number can't just always go up. I mean, it can, and that just means you're doing an awesome job and putting in a lot of resources. But it's actually okay for it to go up, drop down, come up, drop down. Important things too, like you might have had a really big investment program to build capability, but have you actually built the sustaining capability? I think the term they use is making the practice durable. So you might have done some awesome documentation, built capability, and then quickly realize our team needs to expand. that's then a conversation with the business of, hey, well, we set a standard, we're not hitting that standard. Do we change risk or do we invest more? So cool.
Right. Thanks, Bruce. We've got one other question we might cover off before we end the session. I'll just read this one out. So having done multiple AESCSF engagements, the one element I seem to run into as a bit of a get out of jail card is the definition of ad hoc.
Yep.
There it is on the screen. Seems to be used a lot behind when there's no documentation and no plan.
Yeah, and good to see you, Craig. Yeah. Look, honestly, I think the ad hoc thing can work for a period of time, but you probably can't rely on it for multiple years and assessments, right? And importantly, something to look up, if you grab the C2M2 V2 guidance from DOE, V21 guidance, has this notion of a practice progression. So assuming, you've said, yeah, we're all good at ad hoc and we haven't documented, we don't really know what we're doing, but we'll get there. Once you start getting to the MIL 2 and MIL 3 practices, it has to be documented, right? So depending on what you're trying to aim for, and remembering that there are MIL 3 and MIL 2 practices in SP1, there needs to be some level of doco, right? I think the other thing too is, what is the doco? Previous jobs I've had, they have really great structured document management frameworks, controlled documents, standards, how they're reviewed, approved, etc. That's awesome for standards and policies and things. I think when you start getting into work instructions and guidelines, I'm very comfortable with that being, like a wiki or a Confluence or, some sort of shared document. As long as people use it and know about it, ideally there's some level of change control, version control. But I feel like as long as people are consistently doing it from a maturity model, like CMMI level, I'm okay with that. And I think, this is where we need some better kind of norms established in the industry of when we assess a practice, like what are the key things, what are the non-negotiables, and how are we fairly doing that across the industry? Because there's a lot of subjectivity in the AESCSF. One thing I kind of say to people is, if you say, yeah, it's all good, we're green, and then you are compromised and you 100% knew that you were not good and not green, you're in a very difficult position to talk to the business. I think you're in a lot, more solid ground if you say to the business, hey, I'm very comfortable with this here, but this component here I think is a real problem. And you have a conversation about risk appetite, and the business is aware of like what you're doing and why you're doing it. So I think ad hoc kind of gives you all that wiggle room for, I think it's okay, but I don't know. But once you get out of ad hoc, you need to be able to demonstrate like, yeah, this was the bare expectation people expected and we met it. So, but yeah, good to see some questions. So
thank you for that, Craig, and thank you, Bruce. Welcome to the team, mate. It's great to have you on board. You've been on board for a couple of months now. Looking forward to working with you.
Yeah, it feels like that. Yeah. But no, it's been awesome, mate. It's been real good. And very keen to catch up with people in Brisbane. And I'm also very keen to get over to Perth, mate. So hopefully later this year we can go have a few brews at is it the Swan Brewery, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, Swan Brewery. Don't give too much away. We'll let our audience know soon.
Mate, we'll keep that one work in progress. But hey, no, I really appreciate your time. And if you got questions,
thanks for the chat.
Feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And yeah, we'll talk soon. See you guys. Bye.
Beauty. Thanks.